The Pokemon TCG has had a bunch of rich mechanics throughout its history, and some that aren't so good. So today we're going to be looking at a tier list, or I'm going to be making a tier list of all of the mechanics that have been put out in the Pokemon TCG, and what was good for the competitive trading card game, what was bad for the competitive trading card game, and what was absolutely boring and didn't really do much. Hi guys, my name is Rahul Reddy, and this is a channel for all things competitive Pokemon. Please enjoy your stay. I hope you guys enjoy. And today we're going to be looking at this awesome tier list, and this is all entirely my opinion. Feel free to disagree with me. Some of these eras I did not play in competitively because I began playing in 2011. Yes, I know that's a long time ago, about 12 years, but the Pokemon TCG has been going on since 1999. I think competitively since 2002, so I was 6. I could barely read. That being said, let's jump right into it. I'm going to give you guys a brief summary of what some of these things were and where I would put them. Crystal types were not anything crazy in the game. They were like one of those really flashy mechanics that didn't really do anything. And so I'm going to put this in boring just because they weren't meant to do much. I think they were like, I don't know, they were like these like shiny Pokemon kind of thing for Gen 2 and stuff like that, but it didn't really do anything. Shining Pokemon was a mechanic that was introduced way long ago in the Pokemon TCG with the introduction of Johto into the trading card game, but the cards were terrible. The cards were absolutely egregiously terrible. And then, well, they were reintroduced and they saw very niche play throughout their history, because back in the day you can only use, I think, one Shining Pokemon per deck. Like, even if you had like 4 Shining Celebes, you could only play 1 Shining Celebi, and they all used multicolored energy costs, which made them quite impossible to actively use in a deck. So they're just boring, I think. Break Pokemon, I think, personally, were okay for the game. I don't think they were like great for the game. I don't think they were necessarily bad for the game. I think they were just okay, because there were some breaks that were absolutely overpowered, like Greninja. Like Yveltal, there was a lot that were playable, a lot that just were complete dog shit that just sat in the binder. Sorry for my French. But like almost half the breaks were complete binder fodder, and half of them were overpowered. So there was no in-between balance where you could see a break be played marginally because of its high evolution cost, because you're adding a stage to Pokemon that are already like a stage 1 or a stage 2 Pokemon, and at that point I don't think it really did much. I think Prism Star Pokemon were actually bad for the game, despite their dominance in the game. Prism Star Pokemon, you could play as many like different Prism Stars as you would like in a deck, but you could only play one of them. So cards like Diancie Prism, cards like Thunder Mountain Stadium, those things, while they were really cool, I think they were not very healthy for the game, because it really centralized the game around how many Prism Stars could you effectively cram into one deck and use these singleton copies to bolster your strategy. That being said, the stadiums were probably the coolest aspect of this, but I was never a big fan of the Pokemon that were produced by Prism Stars, and I was never a huge fan of the energies as well, because things like Beast Energy were way too overpowered given their niche use case, but the cards that were printed alongside them. So it just created these unhealthy strategies, and the entire format was warped around these cards during their time, and I never really liked that. Radiant Pokemon, I'm actually going to put in good for the game, so like my S tier category, because Radiants, I think, were a fixed version of Prism Star cards, where while Prism Star cards, you could play a Diancie, like the Beast Energy, all these things in one deck, you could not do that with Radiant Pokemon, or you cannot do that with Radiant Pokemon. You can only have one Radiant Pokemon in your entire deck, which makes you pick and choose what you want to play. Imagine if we could play Radiant Greninja and Radiant Charizard in the same deck. Lost Box would be absolutely broken in every capacity. Like, there are going to be decks that can abuse these very powerful tools, which is what Prism Star cards did, but Radiant Pokemon have fixed that by saying you can only have one. So you're going to have to think about where you want to focus your strategy and what's going to be strong and what's not going to be strong in your strategy. I'm going to go ahead and put Star Pokemon in good for the game as well, because Star Pokemon were a little bit of a higher power level card, while still being very balanced for their niche in the time period. A little bit more difficult to get at the time, but I do think the cards were very healthy and added a lot of nuance to the game. The Star Pokemon were not around when I played, so I've only had, or like I didn't play with them, sorry, is what I want to say, but I've had the pleasure to look at some of these older decks and look at cards like Umbreon Star, Espeon Star, some of these cards that were so powerful in their time that they were splashed into these decks to kind of make an impact, rather than being the central, like, you need like 4 copies of an Umbreon or something like that, which we will see later down the line with EXs and tag teams and stuff, where they're so powerful that you're like, this does not seem good for the game. I'm going to go ahead and put Plasma in bad for the game. So while I don't think Plasma is necessarily a mechanic. I will say that to preface this. I don't know why it's on this list. I didn't make this list. But I think Plasma, when it came out, it made a lot of sense. Like a lot of the cards had synergy with itself, whereas the Deoxys EX would give it more damage. Colossus Machine would pull the cards out of the deck. You had Kyurem, you had Prism Energy in the format to do to use any of the colored attackers. You had Thunderous EX to power up your other Pokemon. You had Lugia EX, which was supposed to be the main big raid boss that takes the extra prize. But when you put everything together in a vacuum, it was one of the first times in the Pokemon TCG where Pokemon basically printed a deck for you in a set, which we have seen in the last 10 years since 2012 or 2013, whenever Plasma came out, where they would be like, hey, here are all these cards that make a lot of sense. You don't have to think about building a deck because we're giving you all the pieces. Just put them together, which I think took a lot of fun out of the game, starting with whenever Plasma came out. Sure, there was small nuances and strategies you could find to make Plasma better, to outplay other Plasma decks, but there was a lot of good players who just immediately gravitated towards Plasma, realizing that this is one of the best archetypes of its time. And yeah, it is what it is. VMAXs are going to go into my absolute mistake category, and I'll tell you why. I think 3 prizers in any capacity are an absolute mistake for the game, because there should never be a world where knocking out one Pokemon gives you half of your prize cards to end the game. In the Pokemon TCG, for those of you who are watching that don't know the TCG very well, 6 prize cards are put out at the beginning of each game from both players' decks, and you have to take all 6 of your prize cards to win the game when you are playing the game. Now, a VMAX Pokemon gives up 3 prizes when it is knocked out, so I could knock out 2 VMAX Pokemon and the game is over. I win. That should not happen. Games should not be that quick. There should be some semblance of nuance. These VMAX Pokemon are basically big haymaker cards in almost every capacity, where they have these attacks that don't do too much, but they're so big and beefy that they're very difficult to knock out. But when you get to the point where you knock them out, they don't do anything. Like, I don't know. The strategy on VMAXs was always just terrible. I was never a big fan, and I would put them there. I'm going to go ahead and put Vs in the okay for the game category, because there were some Vs with some really, really cool abilities, and I think they weren't really game warping. Like Zacian's Intrepid Sword was pretty overpowered. Zamazenta had the ability to like deal with VMAXs, and so some of these Vs were really, really cool, and I think as they stand, I think they were pretty okay for the game, given that a lot of the Vs were unplayable garbage, but some of the Vs were really cool to work with, and I think the idea of having 2 prizers that are kind of big haymakers is still fine with me. I think 2 prizers are still fine to be in the format, but I think 3 is where I draw the line. I think V-Stars were okay for the game as well. I'm not going to say good, because I think V-Star powers are still pretty, like, imbalanced is probably the best way to put it. Like, I think Arceus V-Star is completely imbalanced compared to something like, I don't know, Aerodactyl V-Star, or like, I'm trying to think of one that's just like complete garbage that no one would ever play. Magnezone V-Star, let's say that. Like, compared to Magnezone V-Star, Arceus V-Star is like the best thing that has ever existed. Like, getting 2 cards from my deck, absolutely broken. Doing like 90 damage to 2 things, why? Like, why is that my once per game effect? But V-Stars are far and wide. Like, some are absolutely broken and created these central strategies, and some are binder fodder. So again, a lot of like the breaks, there's no like in between category, but I feel like the ones that are at the top end are so overpowered. I'm going to go ahead and put GX in okay for the game as well, because I think tag teams and GXs are going to be separated for the sake of this video. And I think GX Pokemon also filled a niche, like V-Star Pokemon, where they were 2 prizers. But unlike V-Star, actually it's going to go into bad. Because as I was talking, I realized that GX Pokemon could also be basic Pokemon. So having basic 2 prize Pokemon that were really overpowered, unlike V Pokemon, which I think a lot of the V Pokemon were pretty lackluster in their basic stage or required multiple energy to do something. But GX as a whole, I think, had stuff like Buzzwole and these like really broken cards, and GX attacks were also once per game effects, but V Pokemon don't have those once per game effects, whereas GX Pokemon have those once per game effects on a basic sometimes, which again, I think that therein lies the problem. Dark Pokemon is something I don't really have any experience with, so I'm going to go ahead and throw that into boring. Unfortunately, I did not play too much around that time. Again, this is like 2000. I was 4. So Dark Pokemon I don't really have any say in. I don't think they were very impactful in the format, because that entire era was dominated by Sneasel and Slowking, to my recollection of what I've read from Jason Klaczynski's blog. I have a passion for old decks. Unfortunately, I'm not fully knowledgeable on those. I would like to discuss those further on the channel, so please let me know if you guys would be interested in hearing some sort of video essay style of research thing, I guess. I don't know. I don't know how to put it. But anyway, Dark Pokemon going to boring. Owners Pokemon also going to boring because they never actually like did anything to my knowledge. Like they were fine for what they were, but they never really did anything. It was just like Brock's Geodude, and you were like, that's cool. Where's my synergy? And all the synergy cards were like bad, so didn't really do much. Flare tools, I'm gonna go ahead and put in good for the game. I would love it if they brought flare tools back, because flare tools were a way to it's like the only way to interact with your opponent's board and mess with them. And these cards were so goofy that like only control style decks could play them, and there was really no counterplay. Like you'd always be thinking in the back of your mind, like, what if they just flare tool me? Like, am I just screwed? Like, what happens here? And I really like the idea of like being able to do slight interactions with your opponent's board, unlike games where like Yu-Gi-Oh, where you have like floodgates to just block your opponent from completely playing the game, or just negates that just say like, hey, you can't do that anymore. But flare tools were more like, you do 20 less damage to me, or you need 1 more energy to attack, which is like already like annoying. It's like a mosquito bite, which I think is healthy. That's fine. I think that was really cool. I'm gonna go ahead and put Mega EX Pokemon also in good for the game. I think having a Mega tool, okay, Mega Ray is the only exception that could evolve without the tool, I think, or evolve on. There was something that didn't need a tool to evolve. I might be mistaken, but Mega EX Pokemon I think were fine for the game. They were like, actually, I'm gonna put it okay for the game. They were fine. They weren't like anything special, but they were really big beaters, and they never really saw like the limelight of anything, because they were not really crazy. Like they were just there, and I think that's kind of how you should view it. Like they were just there, and they were like, you needed the tool, the Spirit Link tool, to evolve almost all of them. So if you didn't have that, you just wasted a turn, which made them really balanced. I think SPs were, again, I don't know why this is in the mechanics. I'm gonna go ahead and put them in okay for the game, because SPs was actually, no, I'm gonna put that in bad for the game. This might be like giga controversial, but I'm gonna put SPs in bad for the game, because had players realized that SPs was as broken as it was in the 2010 or 2008 to 2011 format, which is a very underdeveloped time. But now that years have passed, players have revisited these old formats and realized that SP is like absolutely broken. Having Cyrus's conspiracy to fetch out all of your SP engine, Garchomp that heals all your SP Pokemon, being able to use Poketurn to reuse these Luxray Pokemon, like Luxray and all these other SP Pokemon. Like, SP had too many tools for it in this time that existed, and SP was one of the few decks that could target down the other decks' draw engines, which made it incredibly unfair for what it was at the time. However, people in that era did not really have social media and information sharing, so people didn't really jump onto the SP train besides really good players. So you saw SP doing very well at big tournaments, but lists were not public and stuff like that at the time. So, yeah. EXs, I think, were okay for the game. Like, I think EXs were all stage 2, stage 3s, whatever, you know, like, the old school EXs were completely fine. And I think, like, that was, like, a good era where you had to still give up 2 prizes to get to a powerful stage 2 to, like, bolster your strategy. But all these EXs were, like, lower HP, bigger beaters, and so it wasn't, like, a big slugfest yet. Now, this is where the game starts going downhill for bad for the game with EXs in the 2012 to 2016 era, where we started introducing basic 2-prizers that were big beat sticks, and the format started centralizing completely around them. Mewtwo EX being one of the first big ones where, like, if you had Mewtwo in your deck, you were probably going to win the game, and Mewtwo would swing at Mewtwo, at swing at Mewtwo, at swing at Mewtwo, at swing at Mewtwo, creating a Mewtwo war situation. And this era was known as the Mewtwo Wars era, where Mewtwo was just the most powerful EX Pokemon as well. And then, like, Darkrai EX was so powerful as well. And these EX Pokemon, these basic beaters dominated, these basic 2-prizers dominated the format because the power creep jumped so high up from Pokemon that were doing, like, 120 HP to now one-shotting other 170 HP Pokemon for 2 prizes. So that was crazy. I never played with Arceus. I don't want to put this in boring, but it's, like, not good for the game, or, like, okay for the game or whatever. But, like, Arceus is just, like, a funny mechanic. I don't know why this would go here. But yeah, it's boring. But Arceus was a mechanic that said you could play as many cards named Arceus in your deck, and you basically just play all the different energy typings to kind of do what you want with the Arceus cards, power up exactly the perfect Arceus for each situation, and do stuff with it. But it was more of like a fun deck than anything. It didn't really amount to much, as far as I know. Oh, they did split the shiny. Okay, I'm gonna just do this shiny Pokemon too, because this is just in boring too, because I already covered this in both shiny Pokemon. They're both just boring. Sorry, I didn't know that they covered both. I didn't see that. Sorry. Team Magma and Aqua, I think, were okay for the game as well. Team Magma and Aqua were like a niche mechanic in like the early 2000s, where, wait, are they talking about the new Team Magma and Aqua? They are. Wait, what? Okay, that goes in boring, I guess. Why are they split up? Why didn't we just do it in one? Okay, that's my gripe with whoever made the list, but I didn't make it, so I'm just stealing content. Team Magma Aqua is underboarding because, well, when they rehashed Team Magma and Aqua, it just didn't do anything, and the cards like kind of blew. And I think there was like one good stadium that people ever played, but it wasn't even used with the Team Magma and Aqua cards, so that goes into boring. But I'm going to go back and just revisit this Team Magma and Aqua while we're here and put that into okay for the game, because the whole format revolved around these cards like Groudon that needed all these niche like use cases, like multiple Magma Pokemon in play or multiple Aqua Pokemon in play to make these plays. Didn't have too much support at the time, but they were able to do very well for the formats that they were in, while not completely dominating, which is something that I think is very healthy, indicative and healthy of a good card. Delta Species, I think, were okay for the game as well. I don't think there's anything to like write home about. I think Delta Species were very, very cool, with the dual typings, and the alternate typings for Pokemon. I think it was a very cool concept, and it's something that I would love to see revisited, because of this new terrestrialized mechanic that we have in Generation 9. I thought we'd have something more like Delta Species coming back, but we have EXs, which is weird because, I don't know, man, like EXs don't really make sense when we have Delta Species that already existed, and Pokemon loves to rehash ideas, so here we are. But Delta Species was cool for what it was. A lot of multicolored decks made sense. A lot of weird weaknesses were erupted from this time period, and synergies got a little bit funny, and I like that a lot. Prime Pokemon are one of my best things for going into good for the game, because primes were these big stage 1, stage 2s. There were some basics as well, but they definitely scaled with power. Like, the basics were not very powerful. The stage 1s were like okay powerful, and then the stage 2s were all like very, very strong, but they never were like standalone attackers. All of them required some sort of synergy with something else. So Gengar Prime was paired with Mew Prime to play some like sort of Lost Gar deck, putting stuff into the Lost Zone to try to win the game. A cheese deck. Magnezone Prime, one of the biggest, best consistency cards in the deck, could be used as a main attacker, could be used as a support Pokemon. Yanmega Prime, the most splashable one, still had a big caveat in saying that both players had to have the same amount of cards in their hand to use Yanmega's attacks for free. Some of the most powerful ones were just Pokemon that could attack for 60 damage for 1 energy, Donphan Prime. And cards like Kingdra Prime were so useful for just putting 10 damage on the board that swung games, but that was a stage 2. So think about these big Pokemon that people were willing to set up to do 10 extra damage. That was sick. I loved Prime Pokemon. I wish they brought them back in some capacity. I love the art. I also might be a little bit biased because that's right when I was starting playing competitive, so it's very near and dear to my heart. Fusion Strike goes into absolute mistake. There's no world where you can print this much synergy for a deck like Mew VMAX with Fusion Strike, with Alessas, with Meloetta, with Genesect. Like, that is not okay. Like, you cannot do this and tell me that that was okay. I don't know why it's, again, a mechanic. I don't know if that's actually a mechanic, but it just feels like an archetype. But again, Fusion Strike just feels like the stupidest mechanic that Pokemon has printed. Another example of here's a set, here's some cards, put them together, have a good day, see you later. But Genesect is broken. Mew is broken. Meloetta is broken. Alessa Sparkle is broken. Fusion Strike Energy is broken. Like, you cannot put all of these cards together into one archetype. I just think that's completely unfair. I think Rapid Strike is a cool mechanic. I'm going to put that in okay for the game, and same with Single Strike. I think both of these are okay for the game because they're really cool mechanics that synergize well with each other. I think Octillery only being once per turn is weird, but I think this was like a cool idea. Like, these are both cool ideas. Obviously, I don't think they panned out the exact way that Pokemon intended them to pan out, but I think the prime example of a cool Rapid Strike deck was the Urshifu deck that did very well at the European International Championships in 2022. Like the Urshifu Toolbox Rapid Strike deck that was able to use a lot of these Rapid Strike cards. And Rapid Strike Malamar is another example of a deck that could be really cool. So they were okay. I don't think they're necessarily bad. I'm going to put V-Unions in boring because I know Mewtwo V-Union has dominated in the control archetype, but that's control, man. Like, all the other V-Unions suck. Like, it's so much work to pull them out of your deck and actually pull them off that, like, all the the Kapow, the Glam, the Sham, the Bam, it's not worth it. It's not worth getting 4 of these unique cards into your discard to actually do something. Like, they suck. They're just so bad. I think Amazing Rares are good for the game. And let me explain. It added all of this innovative deck building strategies. It really made a lot of these like special energies that were printed throughout the Sword and Shield block relevant. And yes, I know it took until Archeops for Amazing Rares to actually be super relevant and do something, but I think Amazing Rares always had some potential for people to try out these weird strategies. Amazing Rare Reshiram, Amazing Rare Yveltal. I think even like people played like a Porygon Amazing Rare box to try to get these special energies into play. Like, I think this was a really cool idea where you had to use 3 different kinds of energies at the minimum to use some of these legendary Pokemon that have some pretty cool attacks. Now, while the cost was really high, I think this was good for the game because it created this innovative strategy, especially with Lugia Archeops. Yes, I mean, it kind of broke Lugia Archeops, but it did add this. I'm going to go ahead and put Holons as well into tier S, or good for the game, because while unlike SP, where SP just could dominate the entire format, Holons was more splashable amongst multiple engines, being able to use cards like Holons Castform, Holons Receiver to find your cards, Holons Research? I don't know. Holland's something. There's like a lot of supporter cards in the Holland line that all made sense. And so Holland's became a backbone of a lot of these support engines as opposed to being the attacking engine. And so while like Holland's Castform and like Holland's Receiver and all these cards weren't necessarily like attackers, you just had like a big support engine that could slot into any of these decks to power up your actual main strategy. And I thought that was really cool. Holland's Castform was a very cool concept of a card being able to attach itself to replace one of your energies in play and become a double rainbow as a Pokemon. Which created like more opportunity for strategies to work with, and it was also searchable by I forget what the card was called exactly, but it's the Holland's card that gets 3 Pokemon under 100, or just gets 3 Pokemon under 100 HP, I believe, which is an amazingly good setup card for decks like LBS and stuff like that. Light and Dark were absolutely boring. I don't think they actually did anything. I just don't think they did anything. Like, I just think they are boring in their times. Like, I've looked at old decks and they just didn't seem impactful. Like, the cards themselves were cool, but I don't think they were like absurd mechanics. Ultra Beasts were okay for the game. Now, that's going to be a little bit controversial. Hear me out. Ultra Beasts, yes, I know Buzzwole and stuff like that were crazy, and Beast Ring really empowered them, but I really like the cards that were like Buzzwole, if your opponent's at 4 prizes, do this. Nihilego, if your opponent's at 2 prizes, do this. Like, that was such a cool idea to put your opponents, like force your opponents to play into that prize card number to do something special. And I think that is something that might like never come back again, and like Ultra Beasts were the only thing that could actually do that because of how many they had. Yes, I think Beast Ring ruined it a little bit by putting your opponent on this like 3-4 prize turn, just accelerating very quickly onto the board, and Buzzwole had too much support, making it like overpowered. But I think Ultra Beasts as a whole and their idea was like their identity was something that was very cool and good for the game. I think baby Pokemon were also, I'm going to put them in a good for the game, actually. Baby Pokemon were really good for the game. They're broken. They're absolutely broken, by the way. But baby Pokemon were introduced in the Gen 2 sets with Cleffa, Magby, Elekid, all these cards that came out, because baby Pokemon came out in Johto, if you guys didn't know. I feel like you guys should know this. But baby Pokemon all had like some sort of effect that basically said like if they were asleep, they couldn't be knocked out or take damage or whatever. So baby Pokemon were really good for setup cards because a lot of their attacks were used for free. Cleffa's the most notable one with the attack Eek, which lets you shuffle your hand in and draw 6 new cards. So you would play your turn out, do everything, Eek your hand in, and then rely on a coin flip to see whether or not you would survive the turn. But fret not, there was cards that could go through effects like Cleffa and other baby Pokemon like Tyrogue. Tyrogue could go through Cleffa, making it like an internal archetype that had counters to itself. That being said, I think a lot of people do not like baby Pokemon because those flips didn't end up determining a lot of important matches, and people really don't like coin flips, but we're already playing a game of chance. Why not have a little bit more fun? Tag teams, absolute mistake. You know I was putting it there, and you knew from the beginning I was putting it there, because 3 prizers are an absolute mistake, especially basics as powerful as this one. They come with these absurdly insane tag, like GX attacks, and every single tag team, I don't care what you say, they could have been playable. Like, I think if people put more effort into them in standard or expanded, every single tag team was so unbelievably strong in its own right that they could be played. We saw flashes of brilliance from these cards that no one expected to be good, like Wailord and Magikarp, and Celebi and Venusaur in expanded. And then we saw cards like ADP GX, RCS Dialga Palkia, and Pikachu Zekrom, and Reshiram Charizard absolutely and Mewtwo and Mew absolutely dominate their respective formats for like 3 years. Absolutely incredibly unhealthy cards that never should have been printed. 3 prizers are such a mistake, and I hope Pokemon never brings it back. I think Rocket's cards were okay for the game. I'm not very well versed in Rocket, very well versed in Rocket's cards, but I think they were very cool for the game. Rocket Sneasel was a really cool card, and I liked some of the Rocket's cards that came with the archetype. Now again, Dark in 2004, I think again is boring. It's just not something that does anything. Maybe I'm mistaken, but whatever. Dual types, boring. I don't think there was anything to write home about dual types. They were like interesting for the formats they were in, and I think the only deck that really utilized these dual types was Xerneas Break, which did more damage per, or like a Rainbow Road Xerneas that did like damage per each type on your bench, which was the only deck that could really abuse these, but I don't think any other deck really was able to use these dual types. Held items were also boring. I think it was a really cool idea, but it never actually did anything in its lifetime. I'm gonna go ahead and put all the fossils into boring because I don't know why they went in like that, but fossils as a whole were just like such a disappointing mechanic across their history. I feel like fossils should have been better in some regard, but they were never good. It just took so much to make them good. Same with restored Pokemon. I think all of them go in there where it's like they could have done something. I think the only time restored Pokemon ever saw play is when they got cheated into play, i.e., I don't know why I said i.e. in person. I feel like that was just wrong to say. But like when you could use Maxis to pull out Archeops or Lugia to pull out Archeops. That's actually so weird that both decent fossil type Pokemon that have ever existed are Archeops. Like, what are the odds of that? Huh. Well, okay. Anyway, I have no idea what imprisoned shockwave markers are. I just don't know what that is. So I'm just going to put that here. I'm probably going to Google that after this, but you guys can also enlighten me in the comments. I have no clue. I'm going to go ahead and put A-Specs in bad for the game. And this is controversial as well, because I think A-Specs were broken. I think A-Specs being one per your deck was a cool concept. I think the early stages of A-Specs, people had some options. People tried some things. The later stages of A-Specs, it was just a computer search, dowsing machine, G-Booster Fiesta. If you played Virizion Genesect, you played G-Booster. If not, you played either computer search or dowsing machine. Every other A-Spec fell to the wayside. Every deck had this one broken card that kind of fetched you anything you wanted in your deck or your discard once per game, and it was like a cheat button. It was like a get-out-of-jail-free card, and I don't think the deck should have had this get-out-of-jail-free card. I think G-Booster made sense because Virizion Genesect got to play an exclusive card for themselves, and same with G-Booster, or G-Scope, sorry. But cards like Gold Potion, completely garbage. Rock Guard. That was a really cool one. I liked Rock Guard. I liked the Crystal Edge and the Crystal Wall that were meant for the Kyrems. I liked those, where you would be given a tool to say, hey, if you play this deck, we're giving you a card, like Victory Piece with Victini. Like, you have these pieces. And then they released these, like, absolutely broken ones with Computer Search and Dowsing Machine. Like, where's the heads in? Like, what? Like, okay, man. And so, I don't know. I've never been a fan of A-Specs because of that reason. Because you were forced into playing this card, but it was a get-out-of-jail-free card. And every deck had this one, like, well, like, oh, I'm looking through their cards. They haven't used their computer search yet. Like, I can disrupt them, but I might just be screwed. Anyway, Ancient Trait was okay for the game. I think Ancient Traits could have been a lot better. It could have been good for the game, maybe, but, like, I think some of the Ancient Traits were just, like, terrible for the game. Like Groudon was, like, the one that says, like, you can't boss it or, like, use trainers on it. Like, what is that? Like, come on. Like, what? And then the one that takes an extra prize, also, like, what? Like, some of these, actually, you know what? Actually, that's just bad for the game. That just sucks. This sucks. You cannot tell me with good conscience that, like, those effects were good. Like, they were cool. They were just really, really bad for the game because, again, they were so overpowered that you had to build your deck in different ways to do stuff to them. Some may say get good, be better, but I just don't like that. Like, I don't like how format warping some of these cards are. And finally, Legend Pokemon are going to go into okay for the game because while Legend Pokemon were absolutely overpowered, the ones that were really good, it was really difficult to pull them off because just like V-Unions, you had to pull the two pieces at the same time and put them down. And however, you could play two of each piece because similar to V-Unions, they both constitute a name piece. So I believe you could have two at the top, two at the bottom, and they would still count as your total four. And some of the ones that were played were like really cool niche case uses like Entei Raikou Legend, as well as Raikou Deoxys Legend, or not Raikou Deoxys, Rayquaza Deoxys Legend. And they were really cool in their respective decks when they got to be played. However, I think like if we went back and explored those formats a little bit more, maybe we could find more gems with Legend Pokemon. But they were one of the cooler mechanics that existed, and they weren't too broken. And that's the thing that I want to mention. That they weren't too broken because they all had some sort of downside besides putting them into play, and you could actually do it, unlike V-Unions. So, yeah, that is my Pokemon mechanic tier list video. Please feel free to disagree with. These are my opinions, and I don't know what I'm talking about 90% of the time. I don't know why you guys are still here, but thank you as always. If you enjoy the content, like and subscribe, and peace out, everybody.